we come up with a name with Audira, which in Latin means to listen. And we're brainstorming, and she kind of hits me over the head with the blindingly obvious, which I had been too close to see. And she said, Stephen, what we haven't talked about so far is why haven't we thought about ways to bring your passion for music into this whole thing? It seems like a natural. And I said, oh my God, that's brilliant.
I'm excited to be speaking with Stephen Kohler, leadership coach and singer-songwriter. He's the founder and CEO of Audira, where he brings a passion for people, along with 25 years of extensive business experience within organizations ranging from startups to Fortune 100 companies. At age 15, Stephen discovered the electric guitar, piano, and vocals, which ignited a lifelong passion for rock and pop music. In 2022, he released his debut album, Daydream. He earned an MBA from University of Chicago's Booth School of Business, a BA in philosophy from Northwestern, and is a certified professional coach. His passions include spending time with his wife, 2 children, and 2 dogs. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Hello, Jessica. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
You were raised in a musical family. What was that like, and how did that shape you, both as a musician and also in the business world?
My dad was a musician all his life. He sang in the choir. He played trumpet and would regularly take me when I was little to various concerts. And that had a huge impact on me. I also have various other relatives that played. And there was always musical activities happening in the house and so forth. I'm one of four boys, and all of us ended up starting playing an instrument fairly young. I started, as you referenced, on trumpet when I was in junior high, enjoyed that, and then really fell in love with music, even on a more fundamental level later in high school when I discovered guitar and pop rock music, and the rest was history, as they say.
Did your family ever play together as a family band or anything like that?
Not so much. I did later in life, did have the opportunity to both sing and perform with my dad a couple times, which was wonderful. I also have a brother that lives fairly close to me, and sometimes he and I will jam together. I am now a father, which is to say I now get to take that question from a different perspective. I get to play with my 2 sons sometimes. One plays tenor sax and one plays piano, and I get to play with them as well.
Oh, that's so fun. Your work at Audira Labs focuses on listening-infused professional coaching and team workshops. What have you learned in your years doing this work?
Love the question. You know, as coaches, as I'm sure you know, that's often one of the most powerful questions is what are we learning? I've learned so much about myself, largely around continuing to think about my values, identifying and aligning with my sense of purpose. And after a long corporate career, largely in marketing and managing P&L, I realized about 6 years ago that I really had a passion emerging for helping support others. And for me, what kept coming back to me as I was thinking about what I wanted to do is I kept saying, it's all about listening. I've always had a passion for listening. You know, as musicians, for those listening to your podcast, they may know the first thing that we're taught as musicians and later as coaches is to really hone our listening skills. And so I've really enjoyed, as I've kind of expanded my role as an executive coach and team facilitator, leveraging my passion for listening to others, helping them identify their values, helping them get aligned to the purpose and impact they want to make in the world. And then as we've kind of built Audira, really thinking about the kind of unique impact we can make through music.
Talk to me a little bit about when you started Audira. How conscientious of a choice was it to really connect the music world with the coaching world? Because this is something that we share, these 2 worlds. And I'm very impressed by how you're bringing them together.
Well, thank you. It was kind of an interesting amalgamation of different things happening at the same time. My wife, who is a partner in the business, and I were early days, mapping out kind of the company's strategy and the mission, and already kind of gotten the meat around the bones, so to speak, as it relates to us wanting to do a different and unique leadership development firm of some kind. We'd come up with a name, with Audira, which in Latin means to listen. And we're brainstorming, and she kind of hits me over the head with the blindingly obvious, which I had been too close to see. And she said, Stephen, what we haven't talked about so far is why haven't we thought about ways to bring your passion for music into this whole thing? It seems like a natural. And I said, oh my God, that's brilliant. And so I immediately started kind of riffing on that idea and immediately started to seeing, in the same way I'm sure you do, Jessica, what I felt were natural parallels between the world of music and leadership development. And I immediately started connecting the dots between the things that we are trained on as musicians, listening and melody and harmony and composition, conducting, all of these things. And then also immediately seeing powerful parallels with the challenges that those of us that have had any kind of professional leadership journey can relate. And so we started very much, I'm a big fan of this idea of kind of constantly experimenting. Over the last 6 years, we've been constantly experimenting with ways that we can take leadership challenges that all of us can relate to and bringing ideas, concepts, and let's say exercises from the world of music and bring them in a way that leaders can learn, practice, and apply, whether it be how to improve communication within a team, how to improve collaboration, how to drive a culture that aligns with your values, those kinds of things, and run it all through the lens of music. It's been a lot of fun.
I love that so much. And I think even the story of your wife identifying that this was a through line, it just reminds me that sometimes we can't be mirrors to ourselves all the time. I mean, this is what coaching is all about. I watched your TEDx talk as well.
Oh, thank you.
You share the difference between level 1, 2, and 3 listening. This is something that coaches and musicians understand, even if they haven't heard it in that type of language before. What do you hope is a key insight people will take away from listening to your talk, or just even getting a glimpse of what Audira does?
I would say the biggest thing is to sit back and reflect. What I would say can be one of our greatest gifts, not only individually, but collectively, which is to really embrace that thing that I think many of us perhaps have lost along the way. And that's to tap into our ability to listen. For many of us, certainly in the Western part of the world, and I speak about my own experience, there's been such a focus on being talking and trying to prove oneself and show how smart you are. And that's expanded this idea of what I referenced in the TEDx of so much noise in the world, which of course is amplified through social media. And there's always a place for our ability to speak and use our voice. I think there's an even greater opportunity now for us to, as Jimi Hendrix says, to really harness that wisdom. The quote that I use in that is that Jimi reminds us, knowledge speaks, but wisdom listens. And I love that because I think so many of us have spent so many years talking and showing our knowledge, we've forgotten how to listen. So my hope, to answer your question, is that people really slow down, harness their ability to listen, deepen how they listen, and just to review, level 1 is when we're starting to listen to ourselves, and that's important, kind of get to know our own sound, so to speak, our own instrument, and that's important. As in philosophy, we would say that's necessary but not sufficient. We then can build on that to level 2, where we are not only listening to our own instrument, but we start to listen to those around us as if we're in an ensemble like a jazz or a classical orchestra. We're listening to those other instruments. And then finally, we get to level 3, where we're listening to ourselves, those around us, and then the space that we're in, whatever that might be. And my wish for everybody is that that all of us really kind of harness that ability to listen and tap in all the way to level 3 listening.
That's wonderful. So speaking of music, you released your debut album, Daydream, in 2022. And you mentioned that you felt inspired during the pandemic to start creating again. What was it like to write and to record during that time?
So powerful. A little bit of context for those listening. Much like you, I'd been a musician all my life and ended up, for lots of different reasons, putting music on kind of the back burner for about 20 years. I played throughout my teens, 20s, and even early 30s. and then decided to really put my focus on building a family, creating a family. One of my most grateful experiences of my life, focused on my corporate career, all of those things. And the translation of that was that I ended up taking about a 20-year hiatus. And during the pandemic, it was so interesting. I found myself, like so many of us, at home, alone. Well, not alone. I had my family. And what was interesting is my youngest son at the time started taking piano lessons. And I didn't mention it, but my primary instrument for many years after trumpet had been guitar. And I'd always wanted to learn piano. So the first step of my re-entry back to music ended up becoming somewhat accidental, where I would take a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes at the end of my youngest son's piano lesson to learn a few chords from the instructor who was coming to our house. And what was interesting for me, and you might be able to relate as a musician, is a number of things was happening that really kind of re-sparked my passion for music after a long hiatus. I was finding myself with a new instrument, so to speak, that started to literally, I think it was awakening new neurons and new neural connections for me. Because quite frankly, I think I'd gotten a bit bored and plateaued on my primary instrument. And so one thing went to another. I learned a few chords, and then I started writing some phrases, and then I started putting some vocal melody lines on it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm really, really reconnecting with my muse. And before I knew it, I had a few phrases turned into a few songs, and then a whole album. And it was a gift.
Just the point. You'll compose a chorus that won't disappoint. I said this doesn't mean life's over. Just another leaf in your song's close.
The next thing I did, Jessica, was I said, I've got all this material, I want to put it together. And it's funny, I'm writing a book currently. And I speak about the next lesson. I said, well, I have the technical ability to record all this myself, but you know what I want? I want to practice what I preach as a coach. And I want to bring some folks in that I know can really help me bring this to life in the way that I want. So I brought in a dear friend and producer to help me bring it to life in the way that I had a vision, a dear friend of mine and Grammy-nominated producer Liam Davis, and helped me put the whole thing together during the pandemic, and just very, very grateful for that opportunity.
Thank you for sharing all of this. I do relate, and it's giving me flashbacks now. I've played many instruments in my life, started on piano, and then played violin, and then oboe, and then found voice in college. And I've been, voice has been my main instrument for a long time. But in the pandemic, I took ukulele lessons, and they were virtual. It was amazing. And I found myself actually jumping into the things that I would have either been too lazy to learn, meaning anything written in a flat key for a string instrument, right? Like, I wouldn't have done that before. But then during the pandemic, it was kind of like, why not? Right. So I was playing, songs in B flat and E flat and thinking, actually, this isn't too bad. So I appreciate you sharing that. A new instrument does provide new perspective, and it can jumpstart a re-entry into a creative outlet that maybe has been dormant for a little bit of time. Let's take a moment to reflect on this question. When have you brought a creative endeavor back into your life? Outside of hosting this podcast, I partner with leaders in the workplace to turn professional challenges into leadership successes and career progression. I love working with executive leaders, people managers, and of course, ampersands. If any of this sounds interesting to you, reach out to me at jessicawan.com. That's JESSICAWAN. Now, back to the show. Well, within your singer-songwriter ampersand, there's an ampersand. There are actually multiple ampersands in that role. So you're a vocalist, and a guitarist, and you're writing the music and the lyrics to your songs, and of course, the recording and working with your producer. What fuels you in each of these roles, even within the singer-songwriter identity?
I love the question. And for the benefit of the listeners, the book that I'm working on is all about exploring leadership through the lens of music in what I kind of call 5 modalities. First, the foundation is about listening. We as leaders have the opportunity to start and end everything with listening. But then in terms of further metaphors between leadership and music, I talk about kind of a number of key modalities that as leaders we can wear. And I start with this concept that we are all leaders. Leadership has nothing to do, as I'm sure you've discussed on your podcast, with title, where you are in the hierarchy, what your budget is, number of direct reports. It starts ultimately with a set of intentions. And the first intention or modality is that of a composer. We as leaders, much like a musician, will often find our opportunity to use what we've listened to compose. That could be a new project, a new vision, anything new for the organization or for an audience. We can then build on that and put our conductor hat on, in which we are helping recruit people to our ensemble, to our team, give them the resources so that they can succeed, help bring that vision, that melody, that composition to life. Then we perform, right? And we can use metaphorical versions of our leadership pitch, tempo, and volume to really help create impact on the audience. We can produce. And for those who are not familiar with the world of music production, it's very much, I believe, about helping bring performers and the overall kind of composition to life in a way that really not only serves the audience, but serves the vision of the composition. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we can be a fan, right? We can support others around us, provide feedback. So I love kind of this idea of how we can put different modalities or lead in different ways in the same way we might musically.
Oh, I love this little glimpse into your book, and I'm very excited about it.
Thank you.
What do you hope people will gain from listening to your album, listening to your songs?
I'll answer that by starting with a bit of feedback I got. One of my brothers happens to be a surgeon, and he literally sees life and death every day. And one day, many, many years ago, I was having kind of a tough day in a corporate role I had, and he said, "Stephen, life is just way too short." The thing that really awakened in me that I'd like to share with listeners is, given how short our time on this planet is, we have an opportunity to really connect with the kind of impact we want to make in the short amount of time we're here, whatever that might be. My opportunity to pursue music again, my opportunity to start Audira was really my own kind of answer to this question of how do I want to use this limited time that I have. And I spent a lot of time working with my own coach to help me identify what are my values, what kind of impact do I want to have in the world, who do I want to serve, how can I use the gifts that I have. How can I co-create with others that have other gifts that I want to complement, right? So I hope that a little bit of that might come through both my music, follow me on Spotify, or the work that we do at Audira as well.
So you've mentioned that you are working on this forthcoming book that explores leadership through the lens of music. And you're also working on your second full-length album. What has it been like working on these concurrently? What has that looked like?
For many of us, and I would offer this as an invitation for your listeners. I know, Jessica, you're quite familiar with what I'm about to say. There's this idea in leadership, and particularly coaching, about following your energy and identifying the things throughout the day, the week, the quarter that raise your energy and the things that drain you. And to answer your question, one of the things I'm really realizing is that the art of composition and creation, more than ever in my life, is really fueling me. And it's interesting for me, given the two things you mentioned. I'm working on writing a book, which I'd never done before, writing my second album. I get tremendous energy when I'm in this creation mode. Now, there are other things that kind of drain me, and I'm learning how to practice what I preach and find others to help me with those things. But I really like the art of creation. And I believe there's an opportunity for all of us to kind of harness that. And so I'm doing my best to kind of curate my time where I get the most energy and can have the greatest impact in terms of, in my case, maybe writing, whether it's writing the written word, writing something oral in terms of music, doing things like this that I think are very creative as well. And for anybody listening, just finding that thing that sparks you and drives energy and chase that.
That's very exciting, that creation, which is happening both in the music world and the business world for you, that is what is fueling you right now. So it's not that something is fueling the creation, it's that the creation itself is a source of energy. That's wonderful. You describe where you're at now as a second act in life. Looking back, what were some of the signs that led you to where you are now?
Love that question as well. Interestingly, I want to plug an author many of your listeners may know. David Brooks has an entire book he calls The Second Mountain. I look back on my journey and very much kind of relate to what he talks about in the book, which was the first journey was very much about things that were important to me at the time. I had gotten very interested after college in the business world. I kind of stumbled into a corporate career. Although I was a musician, I needed a full-time steady gig. I kind of fall very gratefully into what became a corporate job, but it was a job in the music business. I got to work for many years at a company called Shure Incorporated, which is a music electronics manufacturer. And through that, I got some tremendous gifts from that. I really learned so much about business, running a business, building new things, innovation, how to work in a team, all of these wonderful things sparked my interest in leading others. And then, not long ago, about 6 years ago, I realized after a long journey in corporate America that my passion was transitioning to a different mountain, so to speak. And that's really where I started to identify my fuel was in supporting humans and coaching and mentoring others, right? And particularly on the artistic side, creating new works. And I'm kind of thinking back on that interesting transition. And I would, I guess, simply share that for those of us that might be thinking about that second mountain, lean into that and explore and give yourself permission to follow that mountain wherever it may lead.
That's great advice. Your family life is a big part of who you are, and your wife is part of Audira. You run it together. How do you see family integrating into your work?
It's so interesting. There's another author I follow, some of you may know, a gentleman by the name of David Foster Wallace, and he talks about this metaphor in a very famous commencement speech. And he talks about being a fish in water. His reference is sometimes if we're a fish in water, things are so close to us, we don't even recognize it. I make that reference to family because it is clear to me now in a way that perhaps wasn't for many years, that family to me has just been a deep, deep core value. Starting in terms of the role modeling I saw with both my parents and how they raised us and gave us such a nurturing environment. And I must have picked that up in ways I didn't even see. Because shortly, I met my soon-to-be wife in college. We fell madly in love, worked together, played together, decided to raise a family together, and it becomes such second nature in terms of wanting to spend as much time as I can with my family, in my family, doing everything I can, integrating my family, that it's not even something I see separate from who I am. This comes up a lot for me when I think about how to make choices with my time. And for me, it's always very clear in terms of, family or people always come first. And as I coach, I'll often ask questions in that vein to people in terms of trying to help them identify what's most important to them so that they can be choiceful in how they're spending, again, this very limited time we all have. So to go back to David Foster Wallace's reference, I would say my relationship to family is like being a fish in water.
Besides listening, what do you think ties together the work that you've done?
Somebody actually helped kind of draw this out of me. I think it's a passion. Now, I know that word is highly overused. I think it may have been many years ago when I was working with my coach, she asked me a very similar question. She said, Stephen, what are the things that, which give you energy, whether it's within a corporate environment, working on new products or helping mentor people or spending time with loved ones or your music? Like, what do you think is the through line in all that? And of course, I think she knew the answer, but she wanted to see if I could connect the answer. And I thought about it and I said, well, it's because I love it. And she's like, oh, so kind of passion, right? And then she said, so what are the things that drain you or you don't like? And I basically came to the mirror image of that. I said, well, things that I don't have any passion about, right? Whether it's a job that I've done or a context I'm in. And she said, so what does that suggest for your future? And I said, well, I guess you're helping me answer what I need to focus on are the things and people and contexts that give me passion. She said, well, maybe that's what you want to think about. So anyway, I would say it's passion with a capital P.
Passion with a capital P. What other advice do you have for people who are either pursuing or thinking of pursuing an ampersand life?
Again, I know I'm giving a lot of quotes to people. There is a wonderful musician whose first name, I believe, is Aristotle Ari. He's kind of a big deal in the world of music business, and he's written a book and has his own podcast. But he's got this phrase, Jessica, that I loved, and he calls it having a hyphen life. And what he means by that is, for many decades, at least when I was growing up, we all had this expectation that we were going to be one thing and do one thing and do that thing for 40 years and then retire. And he said, the world's changed. And oh, by the way, that was probably a false narrative. We don't have to choose or be one thing. Mm-hmm. And by the way, one of the things I love about what you're supporting here, Jessica, is this idea of an ampersand, that we can do more than one. And so Ari talks about this hyphen where he says, look, I'm a podcaster, I'm a musician, I'm an author, I'm all these things. And there's a hyphen between each of these. And I choose to embrace them all. And so my invitation to those listening, much in the spirit of this podcast, is embrace that hyphen, embrace that ampersand. Be everything you want to be, and don't feel like you have to make a choice if you don't want to.
Through these interviews, we are co-creating the Ampersand Manifesto, Principles for Leading a Multi-Passionate Life. What do you think should be included?
Any and all people from all walks of life. And I of course, started to really enjoy a lot of your other episodes. I would say keep doing what you're doing. Keep interviewing as many people from different walks of life, those most fascinating people at the dinner party, as you like to say. And keep that up, because I think I know I get so much out of it, and those listening would. So the more the merrier, as we say. And thank you for your amazing work.
Oh, thank you. Stephen, it's been such a pleasure talking with you and hearing more of your story. Folks, you can learn more about Stephen's work at audiralabs.com and stephenkohlermusic.com, or find him on Spotify. We'll link to these in the show notes. If you liked this show, share it with your friends and fellow ampersands, and make sure to hit the follow button to be notified when new episodes drop. It would mean the world to us if you took 2 minutes to rate and review the show. Just go to the main show page on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and look for the stars. I had a chance to listen back on my interview with Stephen, and I wanted to share a few key takeaways. 1, Stephen talked about the 3 levels of listening. This is something that both he and I learned in our respective coach training programs and practice every day as coaches. I wanted to share just a morsel here in case listeners hadn't come across this description before. Level 1 is internal listening to your inner voice. Level 2 is focused listening intently to another person. Level 3 is global listening to others in the context of their entire surroundings. This is just the briefest of overviews, but if you're interested in learning more, the International Coaching Federation has wonderful resources about the 3 levels of listening on its website. 2, I was really inspired by Stephen's story of picking up music again during the pandemic after a 20-year hiatus. On this show, we often use the back burner, front burner analogy, and it is never too late to bring something forward from a slow simmer. And not only did he start playing again after that time away, he released his first album. 3, I loved the way Stephen talked about how the energy is flowing for him right now, in a place of creation and composition, both in his work as a musician and as a leadership coach. We can't always predict how certain activities will feel ahead of time until we try them. Some activities might drain you, which is a good indication to stop for now. But when you find that your energy is flowing, that's the time to press ahead.
Passion with a capital P.